So this is Anatomy and Physiology, and it's released on the 1st of the 11th, and it's due in on the 18th of the 11th, so you've got a bit of time. There's some time in half term to kind of deal with this assessment. So it's got a number of criteria: P3, P4, P5, M2, M3 and D2, and you can obviously see that yourself. I'm not going to read them out, but I am going to take you inside the brief to walk you through them. So for the start, it kind of sets the scene with the vocational scenario. You've got to create a booklet, and if we look inside here, just let's start with the front part of it. We're looking for P3, and P3 is looking to label up each of the major muscles, but not only just label up the muscles, we're looking to try and get those key information. So do we know the location of the muscle? Do we know the origin, the insertion, the action and the function? So I'm going to talk you through that now in an example. So in this assignment here, what we can see is that we've got each of the muscles clearly identified, and again, I'm happy for you, if you've done the diagram in lesson, to take that picture and upload that picture to this section. Just make it sure it's really clear that the photo, you can read the text. If the text is blurred, then obviously I won't be able to award the criteria. It must be really clear that you've done each section, so that you can see the learner has done it here. And also they've included the table. Now I don't mind how you do it, actually. You can either do it like this, like we did in lesson, where we put each of these sections, okay, each of these things for the muscle labeled next to them, or you can include a table. It's up to you in terms of your preference. Okay, but what we must have for each muscle is that 1, they're clearly identified, and 2, we have the origin, the insertion, the function or exercise, and the location of it. We must have that. So that's for P3. If we go back to the assignment brief, it then talks us through the next stage. Okay, so then it says, can we describe and explain 3 classifications of muscles found within the body? Okay, together with the 3 different fiber types, and we must, in terms of describing them, yes, we tell you what the key characteristics of each muscles are, but then actually how they function within the body. And then if we're looking for the distinction criteria, what we're doing is we're comparing and contrasting the cardiac, smooth and skeletal muscles, and then we'll move on and we'll compare and contrast the type 1, type 2A and type 2B fibre types. Now in this example I've got here, I don't believe the D2 is done particularly thoroughly, and there is an opportunity for you to build on that. So on the muscle types, we can see that they've talked about the smooth muscle, and they've described and they've explained how it functions. What they've tried to do here is they've tried to kind of compare and contrast in text. You can try and do that, or in the paragraph, but I recommend that if you describe and explain them in this section, so you describe and explain the smooth, you describe and explain the cardiac, and you describe and explain the skeletal, then at the bottom I would show your compare and contrast across the 3 muscle types. I think it's a lot easier to kind of to pull that together at the end. Okay, and then what he moves on to do is he goes on to the 3 fiber types, and so we can see he's described and explained each of the fiber types. But what he hasn't done here is he needs to compare and contrast them. So what are the similarities and the differences of the fibre types, and maybe apply that to sports examples as well. So, you know, that this fibre type is much more appropriate for this sport because this and this. Okay, as well as talking about how the characteristics may differ or also be similar. What you'll find is that there are similarities between type 1 and type 2A, and there are similarities between type 2B and type 2A, but type 2B and type 1 have no or very few similarities. All right, we're going to go back to the brief, and we'll look at the next stage. So in the final section of your report, you need to use a flow diagram describing and explaining how muscles produce movement. okay, through the sliding filament theory. So let's have a look at that now in the brief before we move on too far. And this is what we haven't learned yet, so this will be taught this coming Monday. So here we are, we've got the sliding filament theory. What it does is it talks you through the sliding filament theory, the components of it, and exactly how it takes place. They've then done a flow diagram. What we will do in lesson is we will create with plasticine the sliding filament theory, and you can take a picture at each stage. So actually you could take your pictures and put them in here in terms of the stages of what happens, and then describe the process. Okay, so that's the sliding filament theory, and that is that section in the assignment brief, so this section here. All right. The next section is to describe and explain the muscle contraction. So isotonic, which contains concentric, eccentric, isometric, and isokinetic. And then antagonistic muscle pairs. So this actually is antagonistic muscle pairs. This is contraction types. So first we're going to look at antagonistic muscle pairs. My bad. We'll go to the assignment brief and look at how the learner has applied this. So in the antagonistic muscle pairs, he's told you what an agonist, an antagonist, a fixator, and a synergist is, but then what he's done is he's applied it in 2 examples. So, and like we've done in class, for example, in the bicep curl, he's then talked you through what is an agonist, an antagonist, a fixator, and a synergist, and then he's applied it again to another example. Okay, so just make sure it's really clear that you know what an agonist, an antagonist, a fixator, and a synergist is in this section, and are you able to apply it to at least 2 examples. When we move on to the back to the brief, like I said, we have to do the contraction types, so it's concentric, eccentric, isometric, and isokinetic, and again relating to sports examples. If we go back to the learner work, this does have to be described and explained the way. You then describe and explain what a concentric contraction is, and you apply it to a sport-specific example. You then do exactly the same with an eccentric contraction, the same with an isometric contraction, and then finally the same with an isokinetic contraction. What I do encourage is that we have a range of referencing. Okay, that doesn't mean that you take it from the source, but what we do is we read the information, we get the understanding, and then we apply our own written language to it, but we do reference the sources that we've taken from. I know Fiona's done some work with you around referencing. I'm not expecting APA or Harvard, but if you've learnt that, then fantastic. However, I do expect a range of references similar to this if you haven't learnt that new style. Okay, hopefully that's of help, and I look forward to receiving them on the 11th of November, where I'll be marking them.